So this morning I want to preach to you from the Psalms, that beautiful Psalm 111, and specifically that line, that great line from the 10th verse. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fear, not like the fear like outright paralyzing terror that closes in on all sides, but like fear, like the Hebrew word, like awe and wonder, praise and joy spreading out in all directions. The fear of the Lord is beginning of wisdom. Reverence, deep reverence for the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And what do we mean by wisdom? Well, knowledge and experience and understanding that kind of are integrated, that come together, producing in one a sense of comfort about the mysteries and the uncertainties in life. And that is coupled by a deep awareness of how things play out over time. I've never known anyone whom I would consider wise who did not also deeply know himself or herself and other human beings as really flawed and capable of great sin. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So Stephen and I returned this week from Haiti, and in fact, at just this time last week, we were celebrating the Eucharist in French, and I was reading the Gospel in Creole, and I was thrilled because for the very first time in 25 years, the entire congregation understood the story with my Creole. So that was a small victory. We were at St. Etienne's, our partner parish in the mountains. And the other good news is the church there is being built after the earthquake, and after 5 years, what seems like an eternity to us and perhaps even to them, the structure is nearly complete, and it's magnificent. And the congregation is exceedingly grateful and excited about anticipating worship in that space. And we here at St. John's had a lot to do with making the construction of their church possible. And so at some point in the future, we can all expect an invitation, and you'll be invited to join the celebration down there when that church is consecrated. But on our arrival into Haiti, we were supposed to meet with David Cesar, known to many of you because he frequently visits here, and he's the priest at our other sort of partner relationship in Haiti at Holy Trinity Music School. And he was late to our first meeting, and he was late because there was yet another political crisis that was brewing in Haiti. The current president has failed to call appropriately and in the right time to call for elections, and everyone in our State Department and even the people there on the streets are nervous that this is going to be repeating an all too familiar pattern for them. Now, usually the country waits until there's some kind of coup d'etat or the United States swoops in and picks up the leader and takes them to the Central African Republic or something like that, waits till there's a power vacuum, and then the leveler heads in that culture get together and they form what they call a council of wise ones. And so David was late to our meeting because he was at another meeting with a group of Christians, because typically in the Council of Wise Ones, there's 6 or 7 members, and 3 are from the religious institutions, 1 a Roman Catholic, 1 a Protestant, and 1 an Episcopalian. So usually almost half of their wise ones are people who come from the church. So I've watched this pattern of, governments leaving and appointing wise ones now for over 25 years, and I'm always struck by 2 things. On the Council of Wise Ones, they include these religious leaders, quite unlike our tradition here, perhaps. And 2, they actually call them wise ones. I mean, that's what they do. They assume that this group is going to help them and provide some wisdom for them. And I think every great country or civilization or empire really does seek wisdom. You know, one of the roles the great religions across time and across the earth have played is in the broader secular culture is to really invite people to wisdom. In the 5th century BC, Confucius said this: by 3 methods we may learn wisdom. First, by reflection, which is the noblest. Second, by imitation, which is the easiest. And third, by experience, which is the bitterest. Now, I don't know about you in your own lives, but I've always been someone that to actually understand something, it has to happen to me. It's very painful. Maybe some of you have been better at listening to the wisdom of your elders or whatever, but I particularly resonate with the by experience. Wisdom might come, but it never feels very good. You know, and Christianity has similar advice to its adherents, as Confucius did to his. And Christianity has had, you know, a similar role to play over the ages. St. Augustine said, the companion of wisdom is patience. And I don't know with you how you perceive the way our world is going and the sort of pace of our lives and the hurriedness of communication, but patience isn't a virtue that I see being cultivated around us very greatly. I think given our technological world of constant connection, that patience and wisdom, well, they don't seem to be a part of the conversation. We talk about instant responses and instant reactions, and that's what carries the day. We have instant messaging and Instagram. You know, there are some folks who encourage we as clergy, and maybe you feel encouraged by others out in the culture, well, you should be on Twitter, you know, and you know, you should be, you know, twittering and getting into the tweeting and doing the Twitter universe. And I'm like, I've spent my entire adult life trying to set an appropriate boundary between me and other people and to learn how to disconnect from the world in a way that God might be present. And so I always say, well, what the hell would I be wanting to be on Twitter for and letting people know, like, when I go to the bathroom, you know, it just seems like it's just, anyway. So, I mean, but that's the way of the world right now. So it makes me reflect on our apparent lack of wisdom and the cultivation of wisdom in our culture and in our country. And it makes me wonder, how do we, as a religious institution, really participate in cultivating wisdom? We could follow Confucius' counsel like our own, and really, and the church does, invite people to reflection. Even in the silences of this service, you're invited to reflect. You come in and we remain a little bit silent. You know, Thursday afternoons for an hour between 4 and 5 o'clock, we do contemplative prayer, which is like a deep reflection. There are plenty of Bible studies and other groups. I mean, the church does have a role in inviting us to reflect on our lives, to get us in a rhythm of daily prayer where we pause to listen to the Word of God and how it intersects our lives. Imitation, what Confucius recommends. We have whole books and libraries written about the imitation of Christ. Or for those of us who have participated in 12-step programs or even others, you know, that sort of phrase, fake it until you make it, or act like you know what you're doing and eventually you'll sort of live into knowing what you're doing. Imitation, as Confucius said, is perhaps the easiest. And to get it to connect to us in a deeper level, you know, maybe something else, but it is a method and a strategy toward wisdom, to begin to live into something with our whole hearts and our whole selves. And then there is, of course, that experience. So the experience of life and letting God in and just sort of getting into the middle of life and letting it teach you so that you eventually have wisdom. Let me tell you a story. It was in the mid-'80s in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was living there. And a priest friend of mine was in an inner city church. Jane was her name. And she watched her parishioners getting sick and even dying of this new disease which no one knew much about at the time. We were just beginning to understand what caused it. The cruel irony was just setting in that through love shared between two people, through that love, their lives could literally be ended by a kiss of death. We were all afraid, the medical community included. We were losing our brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, parishioners and friends. Jane worked fast and furiously with a whole group of Episcopalians to find funding, to buy a house, to form a board and begin to provide housing and care for these suffering folks and their families, because they were really at the time pariahs, untouchables. People feared the disease and didn't know how to interact or intersect with them. Often beautiful, talented, and young people were fading away before our very eyes, and we barely knew how to understand what was taking them away or how to care for them. Worse than Ebola in a way, because we did not know how to protect ourselves, but still felt compelled to care for those we loved. Caracol was founded in 1987 as a home for AIDS sufferers and for their families, and it still exists today. And the priest, Jane, who had worked so hard to make Caracol a reality after many years of dedicated work, went off to the 6th annual AIDS conference in San Francisco in 1990 to learn more, to share her story, to find support, among others, those who had heroically stepped up as she had. But as she planned her trip, she allowed an extra 3 days. I said to her, "Well, where are you going, Jane?" And she said, "I just want to stop off at the Grand Canyon, just to sit down at the edge of the rim and to soak in the beauty and the tranquility, the majesty and the magnificence of that natural wonder." She said that she knew that she would need that time of reflection after a conference where so much heartbreak would be shared. And so she went there to restore her sense of God's presence in her life and to seek God's wisdom for the next steps. So let me tell you a joke. There was this atheist who was walking in the woods on a really beautiful day. And he was in awe of the day and his surroundings, and he thought to himself, how magnificent the animals are, and how majestic these trees, and how melodious the songs of the birds, and how powerful the sounds of the flow of that river. And just then he heard a rustling in the bushes. And so he turned around and looked, and there was an 8-foot-tall grizzly bear, and he was scared out of his wits. And so, unlike the advice that you're supposed to sort of stand still, he took off running. And he ran as fast as he could, and then he looked behind him, and the bear was still there. And he ran some more, and he looked behind, and the bear was closing in. And he got nervous, and he thought, can bears climb trees? I can't remember. And he looked around for a tree to climb to maybe escape the bear. And as he was looking up, he tripped over the root of a tree, and he fell flat on his face on the forest floor. And he cried out, "God help me!" Time stopped. The forest went silent. The bear froze. A bright light shone through the top of the forest, and a voice from heaven said, "You've claimed I don't exist all these years. Did you call me? Have you suddenly become a believer in me? Do you want to be a Christian?" The atheist thought for a moment, scrunched up his face, and said, "I'd hate to be a hypocrite, so instead of making me a Christian, what about, could you make the bear a Christian?" "Very well," the voice said. The light faded, the sounds returned to the forest, and the bear began to move. And he put his right paw to his left paw, bowed his head, and said, Lord, bless this food which I am about to receive from your bounty through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. I don't know if it takes getting scared out of our wits to turn to God and to make room. I don't know if it comes from the awe, but all of those are related to wisdom. And I don't know what restores your own sense of God's presence in your life, or wherein there are circumstances when you are on your face, flat on the floor, on the forest floor, and you cry out for God's help. But you know where those places are. You know wherein you are vulnerable and where your fears overwhelm you, or your fear of the future is so present that you are afraid to risk, or you are so uncertain about life itself that it drives you crazy, and you need to lean into and to trust God. But I suspect that we all know wherein we find the Spirit inviting us to connect to that dimension and purpose that is beyond ourselves. So I really do invite you. And the good news is the church provides. That's the good news of these stories today. I invite you to find your time and a place, your own times and your own spaces in your life to cultivate your wisdom. Let your experiences, let them make you wiser in a conversation with God. And when you are unwilling or unable to fake it till you make it, turn to Christ and say, help me be more like you, or like one of the saints. And just try that life of seeking God first and seeking God's wisdom and not your own. And for goodness sakes, follow the advice of all great religions, including our own, and spend time in prayer and reflection, noticing how and when and where and why you find yourself in the world in ways that you connect to the divine, in ways that make you more compassionate and a better servant. And take more time in your day in those places and in those spaces. We may need to put down some of our devices. We may need to gather more often for prayer or meditation or contemplation. But it is possible that we can become a reservoir of wisdom for the sake of God and for the sake of the world. Amen.